everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So I'm here with the 5th update for my palette of the month, and for this series I've just been using a different eyeshadow palette each month, and then once the month is over I do an update video where I go over my experience with the eyeshadow palette and I introduce the palette I would be using for the current month. So in May I used the Urban Decay Vice 2 palette. This was the palette I got from a friend. Recently with a group of friends we did like a makeup swap where everyone brought makeup that they wanted to declutter and we all kind of shared it amongst each other. So this is the palette, and right off the bat I'll mention this shade Radar had shattered, so that one isn't intact, but the rest are. So it's a really pretty palette. I have the box and it describes the palette as being insanely cool brights, not your average neutrals, and sexy hints of smoke. It's definitely a bright palette with like more smoky sort of tones. I think the description of that really works. So with this palette there's 20 shadows in total, so I definitely had to, you know, be a little bit more creative. I couldn't just wear all the shades like all over the lid. I had to create some looks and use some of the shadows together, especially because this palette doesn't have a lot of shades that I would consider that are like safe for work, or at least where I work. So the ones that I wore for work were just these bottom three. So that's Dope, which is a little bit of a shimmery, little bit satin, sort of cream type shade. Then Toxic, which is a little deeper, a little bit more of it. It's also shimmery, more sort of orangey tone. It was really pretty. And then this matte shade Habit, which is just a very like beige sort of color. So those three are ones I'd wear all over the lid to work, kind of depending on my mood, when I wanted to wear. I had those three to choose from. So with the rest of the shades in the palette, I couldn't just wear them like on the weekends. Like I did, but I couldn't just wear one at a time. I definitely had to create some looks. So I wrote down the looks that I created. So the first look that I did was with 3 different shades. It was with Voodoo, this purple shade here, a darker purple than the one next to it, but this purple shade here. Coax, which is the shimmery pink up here, and Toxic. So I used those 3 shades together for a look. I don't really remember this look. I remember some of the more recent looks, but this was one of the first ones I did with this shade, and this shade. The next look I did was a little bit more of a smoky look. So I used Ambush, the shimmery shade down here. Rewind, which is the one next to it, this more matte shade. I use that as a crease shade. Also Stash, which is this olivey shimmery green. I had that one as an eyeliner before and really liked it, but that was quite a few years ago. So I used that green shade, and then Habit, which is this shade. I tried in this look to use this shade as a brow bone highlight because it is the lightest sort of cream shade. It was a little too dark for me as a brow bone highlight, so I only tried that once with this look, but I used these 3 shades at the bottom and then Stash. I think I used Stash as on my lower lash line. I used this one as a brow bone highlight. I used Ambush all over the lid, and then I used Rewind as the crease shade. So I used those 4 shades. I did like how that one turned out, with the exception of I didn't really care for Habit as a brow bone highlight. Mostly for brow bone highlight I would use my little trusted Urban Decay Naked 2 Basics palette. I always pull for this one for a brow bone highlight, and I use the Skimp shade. So I did use this little palette in conjunction with the Vice palette, and it was mainly for the Skimp shade. So that was the second look that I did. The next look I did had the shades Damaged, which is, where's Damaged? Okay, so the next one I did was the sort of blue-green shade or look. So I used the shade Damaged, this really pretty like shimmery sort of forest green. I used Madness, the one above it, sort of the same sort of an idea, shimmery blue. It has Prank, It was really super pretty. Just a matte sort of navy, and then I used Shell Shock. So I think with this one, I put Prank over the lid as sort of the base, this matte shade, and then I like worked on putting Madness on top of it, made that like shimmer blue shade pop. And also in the on the lower lash line, I kind of mixed Shell Shock and Damaged. Started off with Shell Shock, this shimmery silver, and then sort of deepened it with Damaged. It was a really pretty look. I really liked playing around with those blues and the green. And then I did a look kind of based on Shell Shock. So I tried wearing Shell Shock, this shimmery silver, all over the lid. And it was a little bit like, it was a little weird looking. Like, I wasn't used to seeing myself with just like a shimmery, like metallic silver all over the lid. So I decided it needed something else. So I wanted to play around with one of the purples. So I used, which purple did I use? I think I used Betrayal. This little bit more lighter purple. It has a little bit of a silver shift to it. So I layered Betrayal on top of Shell Shock for a look. And then I used Lovesick, I believe. Yeah, Lovesick. This one is a black shade, but it has little like micro glitter, so I use that one as a liner. A lot of times with black shades, I'll use them as a liner if I don't know of another way to wear it. So with that look, I used Lovesick, this one, as the liner, had Shell Shock over the lid, and then Betrayal layered on top of Shell Shock. So just 3 shadows for that look, and then a brow bone highlight, which I used from my other little palette. And then the last look that I did, and this was when I had like so many shades left in the palette that I hadn't used yet, so it's kind of more of an interesting look. But for this last shade, I used X-Rated. It's this pink, this more like matte pink. I had that all over the lid, and then I used Betrayal. I used Betrayal quite a bit, but I used this as sort of a crease shade. I had the pink on, and I'm like, I want to add something. I don't know if I like the pink on its own, so I used kind of Betrayal in the crease. It was kind of interesting as a crease shade. I'm not sure if it was my absolute favorite, but I was trying to like do something with the look. And then I used Smoke Out once again as a liner. Smoke Out is this black here. So those are the looks I kind of came up with. Some of them were definitely more successful than others. I think my favorite looks that I did was the blue and the green look with Prank, Madness, Damaged, and Shell Shock. And then I liked the more smoky look I did with these shades at the bottom with Ambush all over the lid, Rewind, Habit, and Stash. I really like that look. A little bit more like more neutral look for this palette. And then I found it really fun to work with Shell Shock. And then the Betrayal shade. I did like that combination quite a bit. So some other things I did with this palette, there were some shades I just wore all over the lid. So Stash is one I really liked. I wore that one all over the lid a few times. Even though I did use it in other looks, I did want to play with it some more, so that one I used all over the lid. I used Strike, just alone all over the lid. It's this more mustery sort of golden shade. It's really pretty. I did really like that one. Ambush is another one of my favorites from this palette. That I did use all over the lid. Another one is Derailed here. It's more of like a gray type shade, but has a little bit of shimmer. I used that one all over the lid. Really like that. I used Poison. It's a more of like a muted black shade. It could almost be like a really dark gray, but I used this one all over the lid as well. I really liked it. One thing I will say with this palette, it has 3 shades that could be classified as black. Poison could be a really dark gray or a light black shade, and then definitely black shades are Smoke Out, which is a matte black, and then Lovesick, which is a black with little glitter in it, like micro glitters. So personally, I think I could have taken this palette with just Poison. I could use that as a black if I wanted it. I see this palette being like a smoky palette. They want to have different black shades, but I don't really use black that much, so I can maybe have the Poison and one other of the black and maybe another shade. I would have thought it was better because I don't know, I just don't use black that much, and I definitely don't need 3 of them. That's one thing with this palette. And then the last shade I used over lids, so I did want to try to use Radar. That's the shade that is broken. There's a little bit of shadow in the corners, so I was able to use that like all over the lid in one look, and I did really like this shade as well. I think that is everything. I think I talked about all the shades. I know I kind of went not shade by shade, but this palette, just because there's so many shades, I thought it was easier to talk about like what I combined together, what shades I used on their own. But overall, I had a lot of fun with this palette. I thought it was fun kind of coming up with the looks. The looks might have not always been super successful just because I'm not that experienced with using color, but I did think it was really fun to use, and it's definitely something outside of my comfort zone. So I'm really happy to have this palette. I think there's some shades I really like, and if I'm ever doing a look and wanting a certain color or feeling like I want to do a more colorful look, I'm glad to have this one to pull from to get some more of the colorful shades. So that was my palette of the month for May, and now I'll go on to introducing the palette of the month for June. So with that friend, one of my makeup swap with my friends, I got another palette besides the Vice palette, and that palette was the Natasha Denona Aeris palette. This was a palette for holiday 2017, and I've heard a lot about Natasha Denona. I know it's a very expensive brand, but it's like a very popular brand, so I was kind of interested to try the brand. Now I know, you know, the holiday palettes aren't always the same as the like full-size like palettes you can get year round, but I'm still interested in trying out this palette. It just has 5 colors, and even though it's a holiday palette, I thought that the look or the colors are kind of like summer. They're kind of like those orangey red shades, and then a pop of blue, and then there's a more like nude neutral sort of shade, or like cream sort of shade at the end. So I played around with a few of the shades. I've used the 2 on the ends. So far they're very glittery, but they're definitely really fun shades, and yeah, I think it will be fun to use this. And this will be definitely different than the Vice palette. The Vice palette had 20 shades, so a lot to play around with. This one only has 5, so it will be more fun, you know, combining different colors together, trying the different shades and different looks. Like I can experiment a lot with just a few shades versus a lot where some of these shades I could only use once. I feel like I'll get a lot of chances to use these shades multiple times. So this is the palette of the month for June. As always, since this palette doesn't really have any brow bone highlights or more sort of basic shades, I will be also using my Urban Decay Naked 2 Basics palette with this Natasha Denona palette. At this point, this has just become a go-to for this challenge. I mean, it has my brow bone highlight, it has transition shades, and yeah, I feel like this palette doesn't really have a lot of shades that I'd wear to work. Even this more lighter shade is very glittery, so I don't think any of these Natasha Denona shades I'll be wearing to work. So I definitely will be relying on my little Urban Decay Naked 2 Basics palette for like throughout the week, and then on the weekends I can kind of play around more with this little palette. So that is everything. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll be back next month where I'll talk about my experience with this palette and then introducing the palette for the next month of Palette of the Month. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.